The Art of Nyuju, Stumpy Brown. I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to Whadjuk Noongar elders past, present and future, on whose land Curtin University is located, and acknowledge all Noongar people and their ongoing connection to country, culture and heritage. Warning: staff and students are warned some of the contents of this presentation contain sensitive materials, images, names and stories of events of Indigenous Australians who are deceased. Nyuju Stumpy Brown was born around 1924 at Napawalu on the Canning Stock Route, well 39 in the Kimberley. At a young age, both her mother and father died, and so she, along with her siblings, were brought up by her uncle Jimili Wali Darlington, who drove bullocks on the Canning Stock Route. When she was a teenager, her uncle sent her to the Catholic mission in Balgo, where she says she learnt the white people's ways. There she learnt to speak English and was trained as a domestic. Later she moved to Fitzroy Crossing, married and had 3 daughters. Eventually she became a well-respected artist of international repute. This video here was the reason I chose this Indigenous artist. I came across this video of Stumpy Brown while researching a completely different subject and was completely captivated by her story. I was curious about what might have been left out. I personally don't feel I can do this topic justice, as I realise that my understanding comes from an essentialist point of view, which would effectively tend towards a rhetorical nature. Nevertheless, my investigations into the life of Nyuju Brown, I feel, has made me more culturally sensitive towards the Indigenous of Australia. In the video, she describes the fear she and her family felt when they first heard the aeroplane overhead. They were so afraid of being discovered by white men they stayed in hiding all night in the bushes. Here we see the interplay of her own parents' essentialist point of view of white men. This is not so surprising or unusual, because stories of being outcast in their own land were being passed around orally, would come to them through other Indigenous people who experienced hardship since the Aboriginal Act of 1905 came into effect. News of the mistreatment by white men of the Indigenous people would have spread to them and given them just cause to fear him, white man. As cited in Reconciliation and Colonial Power, Aboriginal writer Larry Langley, 1995, states, "Without our land we are nobody. We will die out. Finish. The land gives the true meaning of Aboriginal life." To Aboriginal life. And by the time the Aboriginals Act of 1905 was repealed in 1964, the severe damage to several generations had been done, and the Indigenous culture had already been irrevocably changed. The life of Nyuju Brown would have been greatly impacted as well. My initial research into the life of Nyuju Brown led me often to the name of Munkajja. In her article in the New Yorker, Geraldine Brooks writes, "The Munkajja Agency, which was founded in the early 1980s, got its name because the first art-related structure in Fitzroy was a concrete and tin shed by the roadside, paid for by a small government grant. Prior to the foundation of this, Fitzroy Crossing had been known as a place of destitution. Many residents there had been forced off their land, and Fitzroy Crossing had become a place for dispossessed Aboriginals. Rover Thomas, who was the brother of Nyuju, had some success as a painter and was one of the first artists to paint in the Munkajja centres. Thomas's success inspired many other Aborigines to paint. In 1992, his sister Nyuju, Stumpy Brown, married Hitler Pamba and settled in a community near Fitzroy Crossing. Stumpy Brown started to paint her own images of lost country. It was there she had found a sense of place, where Indigenous artists hung out and created a thriving community. One of her fondest memories was in talking to other artists and people about the stories and her memories in her childhood, of which her art was part of. The art of Nyuju Brown is closely linked to her identity. The story of the self that she tells others is one of identification with being Indigenous, belonging to the desert country. She comments that she painted about the time before she knew white man, and that time that she regards as being purely Indigenous implies that the element within her that she wants to express artistically is deep in her childhood, memories of an innocent time where connection to country is clear and untainted. Her art is all about the land of her childhood. Her art is spontaneous and lively with bursts of colour. She often works with the motif of the circle that represents the waterholes and of bush tucker. Before she passed away, Nyuju Stumpy Brown told this story. My paintings are about my country, my mother's country, and my father's country. We lived in the desert country, the great sandy desert. I paint the waterholes and bush tucker found at those waterholes. We were living on bush tucker in the desert, on bush tucker only. I paint about the time before we knew Katia. She describes her country, Kukapunya, as desert country. There are no rivers. We never see running water like rivers, only creeks after the rain, only Gigi or sandhills. As a desert people, a lot of importance was placed on the waterholes and the rock holes that family groups travelled to and stayed in for a while. These are the family relationships which are grounded in country. Patrick Oladudi, 2007, stated, "This is where our people got together as one along these wells." To understand the effect of colonization and the impact it had on her art is to listen to the words she uses to describe her culture and by the action she had taken in her life against repressive legislation. In the video, she doesn't speak badly of the Catholics who had given her some food and shelter and education when she was young, but she describes her life as a domestic as, "In the early days, we got no money, just tobacco. We were working hard for nothing." It was later, when she had become an artist of reputation, winning awards for her art in 2005 and travelling overseas exhibiting her art, that she had found her voice to talk about what happened to her younger years. It had become imperative for her to hold on to her culture for herself and for the young. She passed on her oral and visual culture through her art and storytelling. She had become an advocate for Aboriginal women's law, to pass on the knowledge of their country and the flora and fauna contained within. Aboriginal law expresses a relationship with land that is very different from a Katia one. Her connection to country is law. Joe Brown, the chairman of the Kimberley Aboriginal Law and Cultural Centre, stated, "It's the law of this ground. People were born and lived in this land and they treated it according to our law, as taught by the old people." And furthered that a person's own country is just like a mother. For Nyuju, having lost both her parents at a young age, her connection to country and the law is deep-rooted, compelling her to teach law to the younger generation and be a mentor for their education on Aboriginal law. Her role was to build and maintain cultural governance of the Kimberley tribes through women's law and with children's corroboree. Traditionally, women in Aboriginal culture have a status comparable with and equal to men. They have their own ceremonies and sacred knowledge, as well as being custodians of family laws and secrets. She expresses through her art the strong sense of family kinship and connectedness that colonization did not take away from her. Rather, it reinforced the necessity of it. In Fitzroy Crossing in 1996, she worked with other Indigenous artists to fight a native title action known as the Ngurrara canvas, a giant canvas on which they all painted the land that represented where they came from respectively. In the hearing, she had to stand on her painting on her section of the map and describe her relationship to that land. The court case was successful in obtaining native land rights for her group in the Fitzroy Crossing. Through her art, Nyuju has spoken of her culture. Hers is a story of the quiet persistence and enduring resilience of individuals whose hearts are connected to beliefs that are both an inspiration to others to follow and a necessity for the world to understand. Thank you.